Hello and welcome to another episode of Doug Formative. On today's episode, I'm doing something a little bit different. Actually, I'm doing two things different. First of all, now you can see me in my video. Hello. And the reason I wanted to do that is because I'm sure it's very easy for somebody to steal another channel's videos and post them on their own and take credit for the content that they're putting out there. But I don't want to do that. I don't want to be that person. I want you guys to know that I am a real person and I am indeed the one that's recreating these designs on my channel. The second thing that I'm doing differently is, you've seen in my other videos that I've taken a sketch that I drew and I imported it into Inkscape and then I duplicated it by drawing over the top of it. So, you know, some people might think that that's cheating, that's tracing or whatever, but you know what? I'm the one that drew the drawings to begin with, so I don't see any harm in that. How do you think a lot of logo designs are created? From a sketch. They take an original sketch and then they scan it into their computer and they make it look better. They make it look perfect. But in this specific video, I wanted to take a very iconic image that is very difficult to recreate or mess up, because you can tell if it won't look right. And instead of drawing over the top of it, I'm going to recreate it off to the side and see how close I can get to the original image without being able to see it if the lines are perfect or not. So I thought this would be a fun challenge and I hope you guys enjoy watching this. So let me go ahead and get started. The first thing that I want to do is I want to recreate the shape of his head and body, because those two shapes are going to be all the way in the back. So I want to get those done first so all the other images can be placed over the top of them. So if you look at his head, it's not a perfect circle. It's not really a perfect ellipse shape. It's almost like an egg, but a wide egg. So similar to like a teardrop, but rounded at the top. So how I'm going to do that is I'm going to take an ellipse shape, and then I'm going to hold control, click and drag it out so I have a perfect circle to start out with. And then I want to turn it into a path by going up to path and hitting object to path. Now I want to grab my edit paths by nodes tool over here, so I have these nodes to play around with. And I want to drag this top one up by holding control and then dragging that guy up. And then I want to hold control and drag this bottom one up, and what that does is it kind of flattens out the bottom, and it you know, gives me not a point at the top, but you know, you can see how it's kind of tapering upwards, you know, like his head. And I think that's pretty close. That's about as close as we're gonna get for a first attempt. I don't think that's bad. Alright, so now I'm gonna go ahead and turn this the correct color by hitting D on the keyboard to get my dropper tool. Now I can just click over here on Garfield, and now I can turn the opacity up by grabbing my selector tool, coming over here to the fill and stroke menu, and just dragging the opacity up to 100%. And now, technically what I could do is I could take this exact same shape, shrink it down, and then just drag it down to use for the body, and I think that probably will work. So I'm going to click on this object, hold control, hit D on the keyboard to duplicate it. Now I'm going to hold control, click and drag this guy down, and hold control and shift, and I'm going to drag this arrow down so I'm shrinking it. And you know, that looks about right. And you can always, as long as these two objects are separate, you can always make whatever adjustments you need later on. Now if you notice, his head is kind of tilted a little bit. So what we can do is click on the head shape that we created, click on it one more time to get the rotation handles, and just grab one of these corners and just drag it counterclockwise just until you get a little bit of an angle there. And it looks like it's overlapping a little bit more on the left side, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold Control, click on the head, and just drag it over just a little bit more. And that looks about right. Okay, so the next thing that I want to do is I want to duplicate his ears. And his ears look like two ellipses that are just kind of meeting in the middle. And that should be fairly easy to recreate. So I'm just going to grab the ellipse tool, click and drag an ellipse shape, you know, and try to get as close to that original shape as we can. And now I want to click on my selector tool, click on it one more time, and I want to rotate it to about 45 degrees. If you look at the bottom as you're rotating it, you can see, like down here, what angle you have it at. So that is 45 degrees right there. And now I'm going to duplicate it by holding Control and hitting D on the keyboard. And then if you hit H on the keyboard, that will do a horizontal flip. Now I'm going to hold Control, click, and drag this other one out. And let me turn snapping off just so I can get this where I want it to be. And I mean, actually, that's not bad. That's pretty much where I would need it to be anyway, so I don't think I need to adjust that. Now I'm gonna create a union by holding Shift, clicking on the other ellipse, going up to Path, and Union. Now I'm gonna drag this up, click and rotate it, and then drag it down over the top of his head. You know, you have to make some subtle adjustments here. And ideally, like, what I should have technically done is I should have aligned the ears on the head before I rotated the head over. And that way it would have been aligned perfectly. But you know what? We're improvising today, so I'll just make it look as good as I can. I'm learning as I am teaching. Alright, so now I've got his ear shape. Now the next thing that I want to do is I'm going to do his eyes. And the eyes should be fairly easy. It's a similar shape to his head, but they're a little bit narrower. So I'm going to grab the ellipse tool again, click and drag an ellipse shape. Turn it into a path by going to, well, I have to grab my selector tool first, and then go up to Path, Object to Path, grab my Edit Paths by Nodes tool, and I'm going to do pretty much what I did with the head shape. I'm going to hold Control, click and drag this up a little bit, then grab the bottom node while holding Control and clicking and dragging that up, because like I said, it's got that similar shape as the head. It's just not as wide. And now what I need to do is, if you notice, it's a straight line down the middle of the two eyes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this. Actually, no. I'm going to grab my selector tool and then just move this down here so it's kind of out of the way. And if you're working on a desktop and you're using a mouse with a wheel, you can just click in on the mouse wheel and drag your canvas anywhere that you need it to be, so you can work on whatever object you're working on. Alright, so now what I want to do is, if you look, the arc of the eye starts to come down to an angle before it turns into this flat line. So what I want to do is I want to grab my rectangle tool. I'm going to create a rectangle shape, and let me just change colors so I can see what I'm doing. And then I want to lower the opacity about halfway. Now I'm going to grab my selector tool, click and drag this over my eye shape here, and that looks about where I want it to be. So now I'm going to hold shift, click on my eye shape here, go to path, difference. Now with this selected, I'm going to hold control and hit the letter D. Now I'm going to hit H to do a horizontal flip. Now I'm going to hold control, click and drag this thing over, and I need to turn snapping back on so those will lock into place. So now I'm going to hold control again and move that closer, and now they're snapped in together. And now I want to click and drag over both of those shapes, and then I want to turn them white. And now I'm going to go to path, union, and then I want to create an outline over them just so I can see where they are. So I'm going to hold shift and click on black, and now at least I can see what I'm working with. I don't have to put them over the head just yet, because I want to create the shape of the mouth first, I think. But I think that's looking pretty good. Even the outline, the width of the outline looks pretty accurate. But the last thing I want to do, let me go ahead and draw that vertical line, and then I can add the pupils in there as well, because that's not going to interfere with anything. So let me grab my Bezier pen by hitting B on the keyboard. And now I want to make sure I still have snapping enabled. And now I should be able to click on this spot right here, which is the cusp node where these two objects meet. I'm going to hold control, click, and then drag this down so it goes onto this bottom cusp node. I want to click and then hit enter on the keyboard, and now I want to turn that stroke into a path by going to path, stroke to path, and now with that selected, I want to go down to stroke style, and I want to match the outline of this right here. So I'm going to click back on this line we just created and change the width to 13. And now I want to create the eyes, his pupils, if you will. And that's just a simple matter of grabbing your ellipse tool, creating an ellipse shape, clicking on black, holding shift, clicking on this X to make sure there's no outline on it. And now I want to grab my selection tool and hold control, scroll up on the mouse wheel so I can see the shape that I'm working with here. And it needs to be wider, so I'm going to click this side arrow here and just drag it out some. And I want to turn the opacity all the way up by coming to my fill and stroke menu, dragging that to 100%, and then I'm going to move it down here. And let me scroll back out to see the size. If I click off of it, I can tell it needs to be a little bit bigger. So I'm going to hold control, click and drag this up so we have a bigger size eyeball or pupil, and that looks better. That definitely looks better. Now with that selected, I'm going to hold control and hit D to duplicate. Now I'm going to hold control, click, and drag this guy there. And if you want to make it perfectly aligned with this shape here, what you could do is you can click and drag over the two pupils you just created, hold control and hit G on the keyboard so those are grouped together, and then you can hold shift, and really you could just click on this middle line here and then go to your align and distribute menu and click on center on vertical axis. And it was already pretty close because that didn't move very much, but you know, that's a way that you could make the eyes perfectly centered on here. Okay, so the next thing that I want to do is, actually I think I'm gonna have to put the eyes on here now because it'll be easier for me to recreate this mouth shape when I have the eyes there to work with. So let me click and drag over this whole thing, hold Control and hit G to group them together. Then I'm gonna click on the shape and then rotate it, try to get it as close to that angle as possible, and then go ahead and click and move this guy up. Now I want to turn snapping off because I think that's going to get in the way. So now I'm going to click and drag this, and the top of the eyes don't meet the edge of his head, so I don't want to go that far with it. But I think the eyes might be just a little bit too big. So let me hold Control, click, and drag that up. Now I can move this up a little bit further, and I will have more space to recreate his mouth down here, because his mouth takes up a bit of room over here. And now that I'm looking at it, his eyes go almost halfway up his head, so I think I need to shrink them down just a little bit more by holding Control, clicking and dragging that up. And you know, now we're getting closer to the shape that I need. And I think that angle looks pretty good, so I'm gonna leave that there. The next thing I want to recreate is his nose, another easy shape to do. So just click and drag an elliptical shape, and it's bigger than his pupils, so I definitely need to go wider than that. And if you look over here, it's wider than where these two end, if that makes sense. So I'm going to turn that into a path by holding path, or clicking on path and going to object to path. Now I'm going to grab my dropper tool by hitting D on the keyboard. I'm going to click on his nose over here to get the right color. Now I'm going to grab my selector tool by hitting S, holding shift and clicking on black to get the outline of his nose. Now I want to click on it one more time, rotate it, and then click and drag this guy up. And I think the angle needs to change just a little bit. And yeah, don't make fun of me. Even with my glasses on, sometimes it's hard for me to see what I'm doing. Alright. So there's that. And you know, as I'm looking at this thing, I think the outline might be a little bit thicker than it needs to be. So with that selected, I'm going to come over here to the stroke style menu, and I'm going to drop that down to maybe an 11. Alright. 9. Yeah, I think 9 looks a little bit better. Now I'm going to select all those, and I'm going to do the same thing here. Hit 9. Yeah, I think that looks a little bit more appropriate. Okay, so the next thing that I want to do, I think I'm going to create the shape of his mouth. And this is going to be a little bit weird because it's an odd shape to do, and I have to create the color of his mouth before I do an outline of it or anything. So first step is going to be create an ellipse. let me get rid of the outline by grabbing my selector tool, holding shift and clicking X. Let me grab my dropper tool by hitting D on the keyboard, clicking on this yellow area of Garfield. Now I want to grab my selector tool again, drag this in so it's more of an oval shape. Click on it one more time to get my rotation handles, and then drag it over like that so it's at an angle. And now what I want to do is, this is almost like a half circle. So if I create a half circle shape, I might be able to make that work. So let me try that. Let me make another ellipse shape. I'm going to make it a perfect circle by holding Control and dragging this out to a 45-degree angle. And it's quite a bit bigger than that shape there. Now I want to turn this into a path by going to Path, Object to Path, grab my Edit Paths by Nodes tool, and if you notice, if you can picture this circle or a ellipse shape turn to an angle, then you can see that it's more of a severe arc down here. So I'm gonna hold Control, click, and drag this guy down. And the top part of it doesn't matter so much because I'm gonna cut that part off. So let me grab the rectangles tool. I'm just gonna click and create a rectangle. Change the color of it, and then lower the opacity so I can see kind of what I'm doing here. And now I'm going to grab my selector tool again, hold shift, click on that shape I just created, go to Path and select Difference, and now we have kind of a crude version of this shape right here. And don't worry about it if it matches perfectly, because I'm going to put this object underneath his eyes. That's not going to be an issue at all. So let me drag this up to where it would be. Grab my Edit Paths by Nodes tool, and then as you can see, it kind of comes up vertically right here before it meets this shape right here. So I want to bring this up and then grab this handle here and just drag that out some. And then this guy right here, you can see it kind of flattens out over here to where it connects with the nose. So I want to bring this node down, and then I want to drag this handle over to the left and keep dragging this down. It still has a slight curve there, so I don't want to go too crazy with this, but that's definitely getting closer to the shape that we need. So I'm going to grab my selector tool, click and drag this guy up to, I would say about there. Now I want to click and drag over both of those and then bring it over here just to get an idea of how close we are. And we're pretty dang close to what we want to be. So with those selected, what I want to do is fine-tune this shape here by dragging this arrow over here and bringing this in. And then if at any point you need to adjust the size of like any shape individually, you just click off to the side. Like this guy here, I'm gonna have to bring out a little bit, because as you can see, it does come out past the side of his head over here. And it's definitely getting better. And now if you notice when you click off to the side, this looks kind of flat right here, and I don't want it to be flat. I need it to have a curve the entire way through. So with that selected, I want to go back to my Edit Paths by Nodes tool. I want to click on this node, and I want to make sure that I turn it into a smooth node by clicking on that guy there. And then you can make whatever adjustments you need to smooth that part out. And then you can just check your work by hitting S on the keyboard to get your selector tool, clicking off to the side, and it's still looking flat. So it's one more thing that I could try. I don't know if it's going to work or not, but let me click on this node and let me delete it. And now we have just a curve that we can adjust with these handles here. And I think that will give us a more accurate shape, you know, for what we need. And I think that's, you know, that's pretty close to what we're going to want. Now what I want to do is I want to grab my selector tool, hold shift. Let me group these together by holding control and hitting G on the keyboard. Now I want to duplicate that by hitting control D. Let me hit H to do a horizontal flip. And now I have this same shape but for the other side. And now obviously I'm going to have to click on that again to rotate it since his head is at an angle. And then you just drag this around until you get the angle and the placement that you need. And then what you can do is once you get the angle about right, then you can make sure that these two match by turning snapping back on, and then you can make sure that these 2 points right here in the middle lock onto one another. And we're definitely getting closer. You know, and if you get to this point here, you know, maybe the angle of the eyes isn't right. Maybe I need to adjust that, and then that will create this more accurate placement here. So what I can do, let me go ahead and turn snapping on, and then make sure that those 2 things are locked on right there. Now I'm going to click on the eyes, click on them again to get the rotation handles. Now I'm just going to click on one of these corners, turn snapping back off, and just rotate it around until it's more of an accurate angle. You know, and it may not be the angle of the eyes, it may be the placement of the eyes. So I could just click and drag them over. And what you would really want to pay attention to is, does this line go straight down and connect with where this point would be? You know, that's definitely one of your points of interest there. And then once you're satisfied with the placement of that, then let's move this nose to the top. Click on that nose and then come up here, and then you can click Raise Selection to Top just to see how the placement looks on that, because you're going to have to adjust that since you moved the eyes. And now let's click that, hold shift, click on the other one, hold control and hit G on the keyboard to group those together. Now we want to come up here and we want to move these down 1 step until they're underneath the eyes. And that's all it took, was just one step. And now with those 2 selected, you notice that there's this little gap right here, and this yellow portion here is sticking too far off of the side of Garfield's face. So what I want to do is I'm just going to click this corner and just freestyle drag this in as much as I need to, because it doesn't stick that far off of the side of his head. And you know, it's looking pretty good. And I'm going to do the same thing on this other side here. And you know, I'm pretty happy with the way that that looks there. Okay, so next thing we can do is his mouth. So that'll be interesting. We're going to take a rectangle, just create a rectangle shape, hit S on the keyboard to get your selection tool, go to path, object to path. Now we're going to go to edit paths by nodes, and if you notice, it's like a curved edge all the way around. So what we're going to do is just click over here and just drag that out a little bit. Not much. It's kind of a subtle curve. Do the same thing on the other side, and then do the same thing on the bottom. You know, not much. You know, it's just a subtle thing. Now I'm going to hit S to grab my selector tool, turn this white by clicking on the white in the palette down here. Now I can go ahead and do my outline on that. That's fine. So I'm going to hold shift and click on black down here, turn the opacity all the way up, and now what I can do is I can create the teeth for this thing. So let's grab the Bezier pen by hitting B on the keyboard and try to get as close to the halfway point as possible. So you can turn snapping back on if you want to. And just click, hold control, drag this all the way over, handle the path, click it one more time and then hit enter. Go back to stroke style and turn that back up to, I think it was 9 that we were using. And actually I think I need to go a little bit thinner than that for the teeth. So let me try 6. No, let me undo that, click on my selector tool, and I think that looks a little bit better for what we need. Now what we can do is create the rest of the lines. So grab your Bezier pen. Now I'm going to hold control, click, drag this down, click and hit enter. And we need 2 more on that side and 2 more on the other side. And just try to split this into thirds as best as possible. So holding control, clicking and dragging, hit enter. Hold control, click and drag, click and enter. And if you want to do a shortcut, you could just grab your selector tool, drag over those 3 lines, hold control, hit D on the keyboard. Now you can hold control and just drag those over. And actually I only needed to grab 2 of them, but if you click off of this, then you can click here and hit delete, and now you don't have an overlapping line here. Now what you could do, click and drag over those vertical lines that you just created, and if you want them to be spaced out evenly, even though they're not on Garfield here, what you could do is come over here to your Align and Distribute menu, and then click over here where it says make horizontal gaps between objects equal. And now they're evenly spaced. So what you could do now is make sure they're highlighted again, go back to stroke style, and then make them the same width as this, like where his teeth meet. So turn that into 6 and hit enter. And now we have this one that needs to be a little bit shorter. So let me click on this guy, hold control, click and drag this up, and then it'll lock onto that path. And now what we can do is grab our Edit Paths by Nodes tool, and if you notice, each of these lines is a curve, except for the middle one. That one's pretty straight. So with each one selected, you just click and drag that over with the hand. Start out with a fairly large curve, and then not as much of a curve, no curve, and then just try to duplicate that over here on the other side. And it doesn't have to be 100% perfect. And if you wanted to make them a little bit more sporadic, you could. But I think that'll work for what we're trying to do here. Now the next thing I want to do, if you notice over here, his mouth doesn't come to a point. It has like a curve right here at the bottom. So what we can do is click on the outside square that we have. Go to Edit Paths by Nodes. And let me zoom in. Click on this guy. And I want to grab this path down here so I can get this other handle. And now I want to bring this handle over. So as you can see, it's starting to give us a little bit of a rounded curve on this side. Now I want to do the same thing with this one. And just try to get this thing as close as possible. And then I want to zoom out and then click and drag this node up so it's lined up with the bottom of the teeth here. Now I have to do the same thing over here. You know, and that looks a little bit more like that guy down there. Now obviously this mouth is way too big for for Garfield here, so I'm gonna have to shrink that down. So let's grab our selector tool here, hold Control and Shift at the same time, and then click any of these arrows, and then actually let me do Control Z to undo that. Let me group these together first. Wow, this is not wanting to cooperate with me. Let me click and drag this out of the way. Click and drag this. Alright. Now I think we can work with this a little bit better. So let me hold Control and hit G on the keyboard to group that together. Alright. Now I can hold Control, Shift, and then shrink this down a little bit. Click on it again to get the rotation handles. And then bring it around to that angle. Let's drag him over here now. And I think that's too much of an angle, so I'm going to have to bring it back a little bit. Let me turn snapping off again. And what we want to do is, let's try to get this line and the middle line of the teeth to line up. You know, that's about that same angle right there. And now what we can do is, let's take a look at how far up the teeth go. Let me click and drag this over here so I can see what I'm doing. You know, and that's pretty close. So with this selected, now we want to lower them by clicking this button, lower selection one step until it is under the yellow shape that represents his upper lip, I guess, for lack of a better term. And you know, I think it's coming along quite nicely. You know, even though it's, you know, it is a bit of a process, you know, compared to freehanding it. Like, if you give me a picture of Garfield and a piece of paper and a pencil, like, or a pen, I can draw Garfield in like 5 minutes. But when you're having to do it by shapes and you're trying to be like super accurate, it is challenging. So, but I am enjoying this. You know, I think this is you know, a fun way to see how skilled I am at recreating objects. And I think the next step is going to be, you know, I think the last thing that I want to do is draw his hands. You know, that's going to be pretty difficult, but everything else is behind his hands. So I think I want to start working on the outline and all these other little details first. So first I want to go ahead and do the outline for his ears. So I'm going to click on those, hold shift and click on black to get an outline on them. And you know, I think that's a good width or thickness for the outline. And now what I want to do is I want to create this inner line right here. So let me grab my Bezier pen by hitting B on the keyboard. Let me zoom in here and then turn snapping back on. Click here to grab onto this cusp node. And then I'm just going to drag a line out until it's over there. Click, hit enter, turn that to, weren't we on pixels before? No, I'm just gonna leave it. Turn that to 6. No, we were on pixels, so let me change this to pixels and then go to 6, and that way we have more of an accurate line there. And now I want to, let me draw another line like that. Click, drag that up so it's about that same spot on the other ear. Click, hit enter. Now I want to grab the edit paths by nodes tool and I want to make that into an arc. And then I'll have to drag this node over a couple times, I'm sure. And then try to make it look like this is one ellipse shape right here. I'll drag this node over here too, because if you look over at Garfield, this almost looks like it's a continuous arc. You know, but you know, that's not really gonna matter too much when you add these weird shapes in here. I've never really known what that's supposed to be. You know, our Garfield's ears don't really make sense, like two-dimensionally. I guess it works, but if you think of Garfield as a three-dimensional thing, like this looks like it's a sphere cut in half, I think. Like this looks like it's solid, like it doesn't come into, there's no hole for his ear, so I don't even know how he hears anything. So you know, it's just an unusual design for him. But I think that's all we really need to do for that portion there. You know, maybe I can adjust this one in just a little bit. You know, but I don't want to be too crazy with it. And now what we're gonna need to do, and this is you know, this is a trick that I used on my stitch drawing. If you guys have seen my stitch drawing, if not, I'll post a link to it in the description down below. It's a way that you can draw a shape and then use the Bezier pen to recreate that shape over and over to create line art. So in a lot of cartoons, if you notice, the lines, it's not a solid line all the way through and then comes to an abrupt stop. It usually comes to a point like that, and you know, over here like that, you see it comes to a point. You know, it's just a very stylized way to do drawings, and it's very effective. It looks cool. And so what we want to do is, for these shapes right here, and you know, even these little stripes that Garfield has on his face and his body, I'm gonna have to use that technique. So what we want to do is grab the ellipse shape, or the ellipse tool, click and drag an ellipse shape out. We want to get rid of the outline by holding Shift, clicking X, and let's just turn it black by clicking black in the palette. Now let's turn the opacity down about halfway. Grab the selector tool by clicking on that arrow, Control D to duplicate, hold Control, click and drag this thing down, but we got to turn off snapping because it's going to be a pain otherwise. And we're going to create that shape right there. And how to create this actual shape here is we're going to hold Shift, click on the other ellipse, so both of them are selected. We need to make both of these into a path by going to Path, Object to Path, and we're going to go to Path, Intersection. Now we can go ahead and turn our opacity back up, and see we've created this shape. And if you notice, that shape is very similar to what these look like right here. Now what can we do with those? Well, technically you could just duplicate these and then just drag them over his ears like that, but it would be more effective to just apply them to the Bezier pen, and then you can place them wherever you want and then adjust the curve and all that fun stuff. You know, not that you couldn't do that this way too, but we're gonna need this later on to draw the lines for his mouth and his hands and everything. So what we need to do is copy this to the clipboard. So you can hold Control and hit C on the keyboard, or you could right click on it and hit copy, you know, whichever one. Now let's select our Bezier pen by hitting B on the keyboard, and if you look at your options up here where it says shape, you want to drop that down and then click from clipboard. And now anytime you make a line, I'll just do a sample line and hit enter, it recreates that shape that we copied to the clipboard, and it allows you to create those stylized lines to use on your drawing. So let me delete that. I'm not going to use that one. As you can see, he's got four of those weird lines in his ears. So let's go ahead and just start up here. We can turn snapping back on. Click and then drag, click and hit enter, and I'm just gonna create all of them before I do any editing. Okay, now I know what you're probably thinking, well, they're not thick enough. They don't look anything like these guys over here. Well, I will show you what to do about that. Grab your edit paths by nodes tool, and let's go ahead and click on this first one here. And if you notice, you not only have nodes at the ends of this line that you created, but you also have a separate handle right here. And what this handle does, it lets you control the thickness of that line. And I'm going to turn snapping off for this area because it might cause problems. So you can make this line as thick as you need it to be, and then you can, you know, add angles if you need to or whatever. And you do that for each one. Just make these thick lines. And then we'll go back, look at the other Garfield drawing, and then see what other adjustments we need to make. And then you can always grab your selector tool and move them around if they're not placed where you need them to be. Now the other thing you notice is it's pretty solid black right here at this corner. Now by using these shapes, you know, maybe you're not gonna get this solid black shape, but let me show you another way that you could do that. We can grab our Bezier pen again, hit B on the keyboard. Let's turn snapping back on. And then where this first line meets the top of this shape here, and then where this bottom one meets the shape, just click, drag a shape like that. Now you can hit enter, grab your edit paths by nodes tool, drag this thing out so you have this thick shape. Then you can click and drag this up like that. And once you have these shapes placed right around where you want them to be, and these need to be dragged out longer because they come almost all the way down to the top of his eye. So I'm gonna click on this one and just freehand draw this down. I'm gonna do that with all these other ones. Then I'm just gonna give each one just kind of like a subtle little curve. You know, you can continue to make them thicker if you need to. And now what we can do, you grab your selector tool, and we're gonna hold shift and click on all of those, and we want to turn them into paths by going to path, object to path. And now what happens when you click your edit paths by nodes tool, now you have more freedom to make the adjustments that you might need to make for these guys, because what it looks like it does is it looks like these all come together. You know, and I know that looks really bad at this point, but what we can do is click on that node, turn it into a smooth node. If you have duplicate nodes, you can delete them, turn that one into a smooth node there, and then click that handle, and I don't know what it's doing. I'm gonna delete that node. Make that one smooth. Click and drag this out. Delete that. Make that one smooth. And now we're starting to get somewhere, I think. So let me hold or hit S on the keyboard to get your selection tool. Now you zoom out. Now it's starting to look a little bit more like that shape right there. Now we could go through this whole entire process again and, you know, recreate all that work over here on this ear, or we could just copy that and paste it over here, and I think that's what I want to do because this video is already running pretty long. So let me click and drag over all those guys, hold control, hit D. Now I'm going to hit H to do a horizontal flip. I'm going to click and drag this over here, and then click one more time to get the rotation handles, and then rotate it around and try to get as close to that angle that I need. And that's pretty close. So now I can go back with my edit paths by nodes tool and then adjust all of these individually. You know, and without being like too crazy picky, I think that looks pretty good. All right. Now, what I want to do is let's go ahead and let's try to create the outline for his head. So with this shape selected, let's hold shift and click on the black. What we can do is let's turn the opacity down on the body like that so we can see what we're doing. Now what I want to do is I want to cut off the top part of his body right here, but I still want it to overlap the outline of the bottom of Garfield's head. So I'm going to do that by grabbing the Bezier pen, and if B doesn't work, then you can just click on it over here. And you want to have snapping turned on. You want to click it somewhere up here, and then over here, and then you just want to create a shape that goes past the top of his body shape. First, you want to change this to none instead of from clipboard. Alright, so let's do that again. Alright, so that creates a shape. Let's just make that shape red. Hold shift and click on the X to get rid of the outline. Now I'm going to grab the selector tool, hold shift and click on the body, and then go to path, difference. Now I can turn the opacity back up. And there's going to be areas of this design where you're not going to be able to do the outline. You're not just going to be able to hold shift and click on black to get the outline of an object. You might have to actually recreate the outline with the Bezier pen, and that's fine. That's not a big deal. But first, I'm going to take the Bezier pen and I'm going to recreate these little stripes on Garfield's head. Now what I want to do is, with those created, I'm going to hold Control, hit D to duplicate it, and then I'm going to just move them around his head wherever I need to. Control D, horizontal flip. I'll click, drag that over here. Control D, Control D, Control D. And it doesn't matter if I don't rotate them. I'm going to do that one at a time anyway. Alright, so there's that. I'll have to do another one for down here. And another one over here. And I think we've made good headway up to this point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to split this video into two parts, and then I'll recreate I'll do a second video, and I'll post the link to that in the description down below. But I hope you guys have enjoyed so far, and I will see you in part 2. Take care, guys. If you're enjoying my videos, don't forget to subscribe right here. Also, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook so you can share it with your friends. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.